I know many of you can't stand Nina Einstein, and for understandable reasons, but at least she grew as a character during her powerful redemption arc. She even joined Lelouch to defeat Schneisel during the Zero Requiem. The change is so radical that it's hard to believe that this competent scientist that's aiding the Seven Stars was once a shy, unhinged, racist asshole. But I can't express those same words of praise to one Kaname Ohgi.
My hatred for this man only grows after each rewatch of the series.
It's hardly a secret why that's the case, as his actions during the Black Knight's betrayal is enough of a reason to hate him. I will briefly talk about that during the video, but my main focus today is his messed up romantic relationship with the beautiful, pure-blooded Britannian woman Villetta knew. A relationship so horrible that calling it the worst one in Code Geass doesn't even do it justice. This might be one of the worst romances in any story, period. But despite my hatred for this romance, I consider it to be the most important one in Code Geass. And in this video, I will argue both of these claims, starting with why this romance is just the worst. As I go through this, keep in mind one important question. Why do Villetta and Ohgi love each other? Because the answer to that reveals why this romance is so terrible. Anyways, let's start at the beginning. So at Port Yokozuka, Shirley shot Villetta to protect Lelouch. I assume she then dragged Villetta's body to where Ohgi found her. That explains how Villetta got there, since that location is different from where Shirley shot her. This also explains why Shirley was so confident that she killed someone. Anyways, the next night, or day, however you look at it, Ohgi finds Villetta's body in a bloody mess, choosing to treat her in his apartment. Keep in mind, he heard her say 0 before passing out. At the apartment, Ohgi tends to Villetta's wounds. She wakes up later on, revealing the two main reasons that Ohgi fell in love with her. Villetta is grateful that Ohgi took care of her and states that she doesn't remember anything. How convenient. Many people call this a contrivance, and that's not entirely inaccurate. But there's a bigger problem than that. Shirley shot Villetta last night, so that means that she's been wounded for almost a day. This included blood loss, and keep in mind most people can bleed out in a few minutes if untreated. So how is Villetta still alive right now? And this only gets worse if her memory loss is tied to her blood loss, because in those cases it means she's experiencing other forms of brain damage. But even excluding that, Villetta should have died before Ohgi got to her, and definitely while in his apartment. The best he can do is patch her up, but I won't address the significant amount of blood loss that occurred. Of course, this isn't a factor, and Villetta recovers just fine, and thankfully her new personality is that of a submissive housewife. Imagine if she became an even crazier version of herself, which is a more common outcome when people experience brain damage that changes their personality. The way that the plot bends to make this work, it's kinda disgusting. So Ohgi kept Villetta in his apartment for her safety. Villetta is a kind, understanding, submissive housewife, so this naturally doesn't bother her. Instead, she does what all good housewives do: cook food. It starts with dinner and eventually leads to making him lunch. There's a part later on where Ohgi contemplates using refrain on Villetta to learn Zero's identity, but it never goes anywhere. Then we get to the school festival, and this part is just glorious. The two walk outside together, and Ohgi lied about the purpose behind it. He then proceeded to think to himself why taking her to the cops or the hospital isn't an option. Apparently, this would implicate everyone if they figure out he's part of the Black Knights. I will address the stupidity of this logic later on, because right now the two are about to enter Ashford Academy, and Ohgi briefly discussed his past as a school teacher. They meet up with Colin in the haunted house, and then later on get involved in those fun antics in the warehouse, during which Ohgi didn't get a chance to tell Colin who Villetta is. Once they escape, Villetta wonders if her past self was happier than she is now. Villetta doesn't mind becoming an 11 to be with Ohgi. It was at this moment that Ohgi had two choices. Option A, find a way to get her proper medical treatment and out of his apartment without implicating the Black Knights. Or option B, take advantage of a woman with memory loss to make the move. Which one do you think he chose? After Yuffie announced the Special Administrative Zone of Japan, The Black Knights discussed if they should support it or oppose it. When Ohgi talked about supporting it, he thought about Villetta in a flashback, where she liked the idea because they could live together. Of course, he remembered her saying that while naked under the sheets. The subtext here alone should say everything you need to know. The man is simping so hard for this woman that he's willing to support the Saz regardless of the potential drawbacks. And I know he cares about the Japanese people, but it seems like being with Villetta is more important. Because of crap like this and his later actions, I think compared to the other simps in Code Geass,
Tamaki, Mao, Nina, Detard, Rivals, Guilford, Shirley, Kaguya, and Nagisa, Ohgi is the worst.
Ohgi's next on-screen interaction with Villetta occurred during the Black Rebellion. He called her Chigisa and said they need to talk about something important when he gets back. She even liked the name Chigisa despite Ohgi thinking it might be kinda weird to call her that. You think? But let's get back to the thing he wanted to discuss with her. Well, if it isn't obvious, he wants to start a romantic relationship with her.
This is where Ohgi begins to make terrible choices that start him down the wrong path.
He has decided to take advantage of a woman with memory loss to sleep with her and probably start a family. Now you could argue that despite having memory loss, Villetta still acts like an adult and understands what consent is. She is consenting to this, and this was her idea to begin with, but there's a problem. This isn't the real Villetta. The real Villetta is a Britannian soldier, an enemy of the Black Knights. She would never consent to something like this, and Ohgi knows that, but still went along with it.
Imagine, if you would, a scenario where the Black Rebellion succeeded. Then Ohgi starts a romantic relationship with Chigisa. Then she gets pregnant, and then, in a crazy plot twist, a few months later, she regains her memories.
How messed up would that have been? Now Villetta has this romance and the fate of the baby to deal with. Well, that was the possibility that Ohgi was totally fine with. I don't care that he spared her life while taking care of her. That doesn't justify what is essentially great. The story created a false dichotomy to justify Ohgi's morally reprehensible, unethical actions. Villetta can only live by staying with Ohgi, or he has to kill her, since taking her to the military or the hospital could implicate the Black Knights.
What's also odd about this is that Ohgi told Villetta to move out of Area 11. The implications of this are, well, interesting. If Ohgi thinks that Villetta is able to leave Area 11, then he doesn't have to bring her to a hospital or the police to quote-unquote get rid of her. It also means that Villetta can live on her own just fine. So why would Ohgi, prior to this, suggest unnecessary options? Why did the story present a valid option that doesn't go anywhere? I love R1, but Jesus, did they fumble the ball here? Anyways,
let's now analyze the logic for a moment. How exactly would that work? I think the idea is that if Ohgi brings Villetta to the hospital, he will then have to explain what happened. This includes the bullet wound and the head trauma. Naturally, the police are going to get involved in something of this nature. What's worse is that Ohgi is a Japanese man and Villetta is a Britannian officer, so maybe the cops automatically assume Ohgi is a suspect even though he brought her to the hospital, and most likely after he patched her up. So that explains why Ohgi bringing Villetta to the hospital might become an issue for him. But what about implicating the Black Knights? The best explanation I can offer is that Ohgi found Villetta's body at Port Yokozuka, which is where the Black Knights had their recent operation. So if Ohgi found her there a day later, that means he must be a member of the Black Knights, because why else would he be there? Then assuming he is confirmed to be a member, they can use him to get to the other members and it's game over. Since the story never explained this entire scenario is all hypothetical, but let's address why this most likely wouldn't happen and how to avoid something like this. Villetta can testify that Ohgi took care of her, so that should ward off any initial suspicion. If the police did investigate what happened and Ohgi was willing to assist in any way possible, then they might determine that Shirley shot Villetta with Lelouch's gun. I assume Lelouch never used it without a glove, so he might be safe, but Shirley didn't and she physically moved her. This is a long shot for sure, but that's probably the more feasible outcome. I would argue this might be why the writers had Ohgi take Villetta in to begin with, because it would lead to a slew of other narrative problems like I just mentioned. Even then, for this to happen, everything has to go unnaturally wrong at the same time. Now, if Ohgi is concerned about being Japanese, then he can ask Colin to go with him. Just tell Colin the truth and to keep this between the two of them. If Colin, a Britannian woman, went with Ohgi, it might make the police less suspicious of him, at least from a racist point of view. They could just lie and say they are both at Port Yokozuka at the same time. In terms of implicating the Black Knights, it's a slippery slope argument. Proving that Ohgi is a member of the Black Knights won't lead to anything. Worst case scenario, they'll jail or execute him. Maybe they interrogate him, but I doubt Ohgi would just give up the other members. There's also the possibility that the Black Knights find out about this and try to rescue him or something of that sort. The possibilities are endless here, so assuming that this worst case scenario is most likely going to happen doesn't seem rational. Ohgi instead didn't think logically at all during this, and I can only think of two reasons why. Now let's analyze the other option, killing Villetta. How would this lead to a better outcome? The police would start an investigation after finding her body. It may take a while, but eventually they would figure out that Ohgi was involved and arrest him for it, and then we're back to square one. While I'm on the topic, isn't it odd how there's no investigation to figure out what happened to Villetta? She's been missing for several days. I'm sure someone in the Pure Blood faction would have noticed and mentioned it to the authorities, or heck, how about her family? Apparently she has one. Wouldn't they get worried that they haven't heard from her in a while? In a normal scenario, an investigation into a missing person would occur. They could at least address that there was a search party and have characters talk about it, but you get nothing. So if you think about it, regardless of whether Ohgi killed her, brought her to the hospital, or kept her with him, eventually he was screwed.
But thanks to some contrived writing, these likely outcomes never get explored, and instead everything just works out nicely thanks to the Black Rebellion.
As I said before, the way that the plot bends to this is disgusting. While this is a major problem that reveals that Ohgi has been full of shit this whole time, I find the desire to sleep with someone with memory loss to be worse. This is a serious topic that the story and the characters don't address as an issue, which says a lot about the writers themselves. This is of course speculation, and I'm not suggesting they condone those actions, but I am angry they don't express the problems with them through their characters. Thankfully, the worst case scenario I discussed earlier doesn't happen, since Villetta recovered her memories during the Black Rebellion. A bunch of stupid Japanese men broke into Ohgi's apartment and tried to kill her. The stress must have caused Villetta to recover her memories. After killing those fools, Villetta traveled to Ashford Academy, allowing the Black Knights to capture her. Villetta assumed that Ohgi would want to talk privately with her, and that's what happened. If there were any doubts as to his intentions, he made it perfectly clear when he said, so Ohgi was totally fine with sleeping with a woman who'd experienced memory loss. Thankfully, Villetta shoots him after revealing her real name and title. Ohgi of course has the best surprise Pikachu face ever during this. He knows she's a Britannian soldier and was involved with Zero. Did he really think something like this wouldn't happen down the road?
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
Now don't get me wrong, I love watching Villetta shoot Ohgi in this scene, but there is something about it that bothers me. How Villetta justified it. When Villetta realized how Lelouch's Geass worked earlier on in this episode, her only complaint was falling in love with Ohgi. He's an 11 and she's a Britannian officer, so it's disgusting in her eyes. I get that Villetta is racist, but there are more important things to be upset about right now. Two specific issues. One, he was taking advantage of her new personality post memory loss to sleep with her.
And two, he avoided getting her proper medical attention while he was under his care.
Villetta could have died there, or could still have some permanent damage that needed proper medical attention. Now in my opinion, because this part seemed like an afterthought to the writers, Villetta is of course fine in R2. She didn't need any additional medical services and suffered no long-term consequences of losing her memories. although that doesn't make any sense, interactions later on contradict that. I'll touch on that later. It would have been nice if Villetta had an on-screen doctor's appointment in R2 to discuss this, but whatever, that didn't happen. Anyways, Villetta's only upset for one stupid reason, ignoring the two bigger problems here. So Ohgi along with the other Black Knights are captured, and I guess they continue his treatment in R1, otherwise Ohgi probably dies from that gunshot. Maybe the Britannian doctors used the same treatment applied to Mao, who knows, but it would have been very interesting if they explained this, since surviving a gunshot isn't a simple matter, even if this show makes it seem that way. So while Ohgi is a prisoner of Britannia, Villetta worked in the OSI after getting a promotion in the military. She does this while working undercover as a physical education instructor at Ashford Academy. After Zero's return, Guilford makes a public announcement that they are going to execute the Black Knight prisoners. This includes Ohgi. Villetta looks at Ohgi on the TV screen with sad eyes. This is the first time the show revealed that Villetta might have feelings for him. Then during the execution, Villetta thinks about her time with Ohgi while bidding farewell to him. After Zero rescues him, Villetta gives a sign of relief, happy that he's still alive. Villetta again thinks about Ohgi during her humiliation ritual to help Shirley with the swim club. It must be embarrassing to have to take orders from someone who shot you, but I guess for Villetta, it's just another Tuesday. Thanks to C2, Lelouch is able to blackmail Villetta to work with him. Lelouch threatened that he was going to reveal that she had a relationship with someone in the Black Knights, and somehow this worked and Villetta is now under his control. Then we get to the A Million Zeros episode. Lelouch talked to Villetta in his room and asked her if she missed Ohgi. That's literally the entire conversation that we see on screen. Somehow this led to Villetta going to the SAS opening ceremony to search for Ohgi. I have no idea what the plan was here. Was she going to kill him? Was this an act of mercy on Lelouch's part, allowing her to see Ohgi one more time? Depending on the answers to this question, it puts Lelouch's actions in a bad light, because he nearly sold out Ohgi in some way or another. Plus, if she killed Ohgi, then Lelouch loses his leverage over her. The whole situation is just dumb. Anyways, Villetta does end up right where Ohgi is, despite everyone looking exactly the same with the Zero costumes on. And after threatening everyone with a gun to take off their masks, Tamaki calls her a witch while also pointing a gun at her. Tamaki has amnesia because he's going to forget this happened in turn 19. Ohgi then prevented any bloodshed. This is the second time he doesn't kill Villetta, if you're keeping track. He also does a poor job in hiding his identity. The two bid farewell, and Villetta again feels something for him. So far, there's almost no interactions between the two, and the attraction itself seems to be based on past events where Villetta wasn't her true self. But maybe there's something more to this, so let's keep this going. Not much happens between these two characters until turn 14. While Lelouch destroyed the Geass order, Villetta traveled to the
Chinese Federation to finally end her relationship by killing Ohgi.
Villetta resolves to kill Ohgi, while Dietar tells Psycho to kill Villetta if she's indeed working with Ohgi. I'm not sure what Jeremiah's involvement has to do with the renewed desire to kill Ohgi, but that's the angle that they chose. I feel like this should have been a priority earlier on in the season. This also contradicts her earlier behavior when she showed relief that Ohgi doesn't die, but don't worry, they're going to explain this.
So at the Chinese Federation,
Villetta and Ohgi finally have their much anticipated confrontation. Anticipated by whom, I'm not sure.
Keep in mind, we are on episode 40 of 50 in this series, and this is the first time these two characters have interacted with each other. And I'm talking about the real version of each other, outside of a few small stints. And neither of those prior interactions gave the characters sufficient time to get to know each other, yet this is the pinnacle of the relationship when it really should have just been the start. But in typical R2 fashion, we had to rush everything.
Before I go over this, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a like on the video if you're enjoying it. At the start of this confrontation, Ohgi called Villetta Chigusa, which pissed her off. She then has her Heisenberg moment, and Ohgi then called her Villetta. He claimed this doesn't change anything. We'll see about that.
Villetta again tells Ohgi that as a Britannian, falling in love with an 11 deeply pissed her off.
Ohgi expressed that he's fine with dying here, despite wanting to die in Japan. Then Villetta asked him why didn't he kill her in the first place. Ohgi explained that he saved her life to use her to find out Zero's true identity, but while they lived together, he fell in love with her. Villetta can't comprehend this because they are enemies. Then Sayako thankfully breaks up this garbage and attacks Villetta. Let's take a moment to break all this nonsense down. I asked you earlier to keep in mind one question, and now we finally have an answer. Ohgi fell in love with Villetta's alternative personality that he named Chigusa. Villetta loves Ohgi because he saved her life, and maybe she enjoyed her time with him as Chigusa. These reasons are so weak that paper thin doesn't even begin to describe it. So this means that Ohgi fell in love with a personality, not a person. He doesn't express anything specific about Villetta, who she is, what does she want in life, or the desire to learn more, because it doesn't matter to him. He just likes the fact that she was a hot, kind, submissive housewife. This could have been anybody in theory, as these are superficial, generic traits. The fact he calls her Chigusa invalidates Villetta's existence. It implies he's living in denial, showing love for a fictional person. I guarantee you that if Villetta didn't want to become a submissive housewife, Ohgi wouldn't have married her. That's why he was lying when stating that Villetta's real identity didn't bother him. Yes, it does, since you don't care about the real Villetta. You are super lucky that she chose to become your submissive housewife instead of continuing her career in the military.
And of course, these important topics never came up during this confrontation.
And I should have stated this earlier, but when someone changes their personality as a result of memory loss, it's due to brain damage, not due to losing inhibitions like with drinking. Chigusa isn't a reflection of Villetta's subconscious desire to be a housewife. She only acts that way due to brain damage. But the story treats it as though she secretly always wanted this. Well, if that were the case, this isn't proof of that. I like the idea that Villetta always wanted to be a housewife over her military career, but this isn't how you go about it. Instead, have scenes where Villetta expressed the idea with Jeremiah or Kyul. Change the story where she instead injured her leg and Ohgi nursed her back to health. This way, the real Villetta interacts with Ohgi and the two naturally become closer. She might even discuss with him her desire to start a family one day. Instead of recovering her memories, Villetta decides to leave the Britannian army to stay with Ohgi. The two would get unofficially married and the story continues. Obviously, you would need to develop this idea further, but this is a much better way to handle this. It's not problematic, more sincere to both characters, and adds some legitimacy to this relationship. It also removes the awkward, pointless tension between the two characters. But instead we got this, and I don't like the implications of the writers using Villetta's memory loss in this way. Tangent over, the point is, in my headcanon, the Villetta we see here is probably still suffering from that brain damage and therefore isn't the real Villetta.
You can even notice some intentional or accidental things that the writers put in the story that show the differences between how Villetta acts before the memory loss and after recovering her memories. This makes Ohgi's actions even worse because he continues to take advantage of this instead of backing down and acknowledging that he didn't fall in love with the real Villetta. And even worse beyond that, he continues to act like Villetta doesn't even exist by calling her Chigusa. This amount of insanity should not have been awarded.
Even still, that doesn't justify this level of stupidity from Villetta here. She's basically willing to give her body to a man because he saved her. Let's forget the grave
or the fact that Ohgi avoided getting her proper medical care. Besides the brain damage, her relationship seems to be based on Stockholm Syndrome or nice guy syndrome.
Because Villetta right now is an incel's wet dream. Besides this relationship being based on superficial reasons, it's also transactional in nature. Ohgi saved Villetta's life, so in return she'll be his kind, hot, submissive housewife. Now, healthy relationships can have conditions in them. For example, a couple can agree to a conservative setup where the man works and the wife is a homemaker. But this is an extreme case where Villetta agreed to do it under owing someone a favor. That's the part that feels unnatural. She should instead want to be with him because of having a deeper connection specifically to Ohgi, not because some person saved her life.
It's actually even worse when you realize that Villetta gave up everything to be with Ohgi, but he didn't have to give up much to be with her.
Anyways, let's move on in the story where this paper-thin relationship grows. So Saeko interrupted that terrible confession scene. Ohgi intercepts the kunai so they don't hit Villetta. He falls over the cliff and Villetta jumps after him. Of course, both are fine, but she's somehow unconscious. I guess Saeko recovered their bodies and tied up Villetta. Why didn't Saeko kill Villetta instead? So the plot can plot. And maybe Detard want to use Villetta against Ohgi, but if that were the case, then why have Saeko tried to kill her in the first place if he suspected they were together? Maybe realizing they were in love changed something. Whatever. Okay, so while I was editing this video, I noticed something truly amazing. Watch this part in slow-mo, okay? Saeko is throwing her kunai at Villetta, but she dodges it. Despite this, Ohgi still did his suicide dive to try to intercept the kunai. If you pause at the right moment where this happened, the kunai is not even close to her, and Villetta has this expression of concern and frustration. Ohgi is such a moron, oh my god. This man underestimated Villetta's physical prowess since he saw her dodge the kunai throws before this, so he sacrificed himself for nothing. To stop the fighting, how about telling Villetta to get behind him? Then give Saeko the classic, "you have to kill me to get to her" speech. If she decided to still throw the kunai at him after that, okay fine, I can accept that. But instead he just acts on his own fruition without thinking. A perfect way to summarize his character. Anyways, let's get back to the video. I just thought this was hilarious. After Suzaku fired the flare, Cornelia escaped from her room. Ohgi thought it was Villetta and ran after her. Instead, Villetta surprised Ohgi from her room by calling out to him. This is the part where I believe the two did the deed, since that would explain what took Ohgi so long to join the meeting. Later on, it's revealed that Villetta is pregnant, so it must have happened then. Villetta, during their 5 minutes of fun, explained to Ohgi about Zero's Geass and probably other things in relation to the OSI. Ohgi didn't present any evidence during the meeting, so I assume he just took Villetta's word here. Remember when I talked about the biggest simp in Code Geass? Well, here's another example of Ohgi proving just that. He walked into a meeting room with Villetta. Tamaki doesn't seem to care, which applies to everyone else. I guess seeing your deputy commander with a Britannian officer doesn't raise any red flags. The man then takes her side over Zero's, choosing to accept all of Schneisel's BS claims without reviewing them, and then is quick to sell out Zero to Schneisel. This is the main reason why people hate Ohgi, and it's completely justified. I'm not going to go further into turn 19 because that's going to be another video. But the simping here was ridiculous, and to be clear, it wasn't just that, but you know, based on his previous actions, it was a major factor. There's one part later on where Cornelia tells Villetta that nobility isn't everything and that she is free to do what she wants. This is supposed to be the last thing to fully convince Villetta to be with Ohgi, but it doesn't work for me. It's too late and doesn't negate my other problems with their relationship. This only justifies why Villetta would want to give up her military career, which I think was a bit extreme.
We still don't know, and probably will never know, if Villetta always wanted this, or was this the result of the brain damage.
After this, Villetta stays on Horai Island at Ohgi's request. By the way, maybe it's just me, but that scene with them in the Ikaruga always bothered me. She looks terrified as if Ohgi was going to hurt her. Very awkward. After the Zero Requiem, Ohgi and Villetta get married, and during the epilogue, she's shown to be quite pregnant. In the end, Ohgi was able to get a Britannian soldier who had dreams to move up in the military to become his kind, submissive housewife. As a viewer, it was depressing to see this. In Resurrection, she only appears to show the baby and doesn't help out during the operation to save Nully and Zero. And for those who use the baby as an excuse, it's called a babysitter, it's not that hard. The creators also thought they were quite clever in making Villetta's hairstyle a fusion of her Britannian and Chigusa look. The idea is to show that Villetta accepted both versions of herself. This worked with Colin, but not Villetta, because again, Villetta's alternate personality isn't a subconscious desire, but a result of brain damage. It's also lazy because they didn't spend much time on it, where Colin grapples with this dilemma throughout the show. As a result, it feels forced instead of earned. It's also depressing to see Villetta so docile during the wedding or during the party. Is this really the same person?
I have another question. After these two became a couple, does Ohgi ever call her Villetta again, or does he continue to erase her existence by calling her Chigusa? I know I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point, but I really want to emphasize just how messed up this is.
But then we get to the GOAT of all scenes in Lelouch of the Resurrection. Ohgi nearly killed himself to make up for his actions during the Black Knight's betrayal. No, you fool. Kill yourself for taking advantage of a woman with memory loss. Jokes aside, this bastard convinced Villetta to be his submissive housewife, have his children, and still had the gall to nearly kill himself. Imagine if Villetta found out. You know what? She'd probably be fine with it and understand completely, even though most people would file a divorce after that, considering he prioritized his honor over his family. You can't make this stuff up.
Well, I mean, you can, and someone did, since this is a story, but you know what I mean.
So for those who are still here, and thanks for sticking around, and agree with some of these points, the question becomes, even though there are some problems here, why is this the worst romance in Code Geass? The best way to answer this is to compare it to some of my favorite romances, canonical or not, in the original anime. Now, you may remember that in my video ranking all the canonical couples, Ohgi and Villetta was ranked 7th, 10th place being the worst, and first place being, well, the best, obviously. The rankings were based on things like notoriety, the couple's actions, and how impactful the moments of the couple were. If I only looked at things from the foundation of the relationship itself, they would have ranked last. In retrospect, I should have done that anyways. C2 and Lelouch won't get mentioned here because anyone who's even vaguely familiar with my channel already knows that I've talked extensively about this couple. So, with that out of the way, let's start with Suzaku and Euphemia. The two spent more time together, and the story does a better job in showing why they fell in love. Yuffie and Suzaku supported each other's goals, both shared mutual respect for one another. Yuffie fell in love with Suzaku's funny traits and vice versa.
We even get a scene in stage 20 where Yuffie commands Suzaku to love her, during which both explain why they love each other.
Normally, exposition can be a crutch for the writers, but not in this case because we observe these things in real time. The dialogue is a summation of events, not a substitute for them. If Ohgi and Villetta had a similar discussion, it would have been a substitution for the on-screen events since they don't have much on-screen interaction. I could say more about Suzaku and Yuffie, but I already did in a video, link in the description below. Now let's talk about Lelouch and Shirley. Originally, this was a one-sided relationship where only Shirley had feelings for Lelouch. In stage 7, Shirley explained why she fell in love with him, and she expands on these ideas as the story progresses. What was great about this relationship is how it developed. Originally, Shirley was focused on what she got out of it, as she told Lelouch, but in season 2, Shirley changed her focus on what she could give to Lelouch, not take. It was a brief but powerful change. It's sad how there's more depth and maturity in this high school romance than the adults, but what are you gonna do? Keep in mind, Shirley and Lelouch dated as seniors so they've known each other for almost 4 years. So I'm more willing to accept that things happen in the background here because more time has passed.
It is generally more believable that characters can naturally fall in love in a longer period of time over a short period of time.
Ohgi and Villetta don't get the same luxury given how quickly everything developed. And even with Lelouch, he does state reasons why he likes Shirley in stage 14. I am aware that Lelouch wasn't dating Shirley at this point, nor did he declare his love for her, but the idea here is he did express why he liked Shirley even as a friend. I think what he said transcended his friendship, but that's just my opinion. Keep in mind, these aren't generic statements because they specifically relate to Shirley, as opposed to you're hot and you make a great housewife.
We're bang, okay?
On to Cornelia and Guilford. These two have been together for a long time. These two got on-screen interactions, including playful ones, like this part where Cornelia tells Guilford she's not like his other women. After taking out the enemies, Guilford concedes that Cornelia doesn't need any help, and she makes this funny "I told you" face. Now Guilford is her knight, so obviously it's his job to protect her, but it goes beyond that. One great example is his speech to her in stage 24. Part of that came from his duty as her knight, and the other as someone who loves her. This was evident in the early episodes of R2, where Guilford consistently thought about Cornelia in her absence. In fact, he's the only character outside the royal family who does think about her. Another proof of this close connection is his actions under Lelouch's Geass. Guilford fought against Britannia for Cornelia's sake, even though a regular knight wouldn't betray Britannia for something like that. This even confused Rakshata. He even sacrificed his life to save Lelouch, who he thought was Cornelia. I mean, that alone has to be one of the best examples where Guilford doesn't have to say he loves Cornelia for us to understand that. But what about Cornelia? Well, she feels the same way, but doesn't express it until late into R2.
You could definitely point to certain parts in R1 that might have also indicated that the feelings were mutual, but R2 makes it perfectly clear how she felt, and that's why I'm going to focus on that. Anyways,
the first example of this is in turn 20 when Cornelia learned that Guilford went missing in the Flea explosion. She is visibly upset by this as if a loved one had just died. And in turn 18, when Guilford screams "Princess," it then pans to Cornelia. Obviously she didn't hear this, but I think the point of that panning was to further imply this is a romantic relationship. But my favorite moment, and arguably the best one, is in turn 24 when Guilford finally reunites with his princess. After surviving Schnizel's automatic machine gun, we see Cornelia recovering in the hospital. And who's that by her side? Well, her knight, of course. Guilford calls her princess while holding her hand and is also visibly sobbing. Cornelia gave up her right to the throne, so technically she wasn't a princess anymore, but that didn't matter to Guilford because she will always be his princess. While telling Guilford this, we see a close-up of Cornelia's face. And my god, is she so beautiful here. The expression that she has more depth to it than you might have realized. This is the most beautiful, happiest, feminine, and more importantly, vulnerable Cornelia has ever looked in the entire series. Cornelia is a proud warrior and a general, so normally she wears a serious and sometimes psychotic face. We see her happy side every now and then, like when she hangs out with Yuffie, but not to this extent. So from my point of view, looking at Guilford like this and saying those words is her way of saying,
"I love you."
If a woman gives you that look, then it's pretty clear how she feels. And the reason why these seemingly small moments are grander than anything with Ohgi and Villetta is because of how genuine and organic it feels. Cornelia and Guilford fought alongside each other for years. Even when nobility be damned, they still remain together. The relationship is so strong that we don't need the characters to say they love each other for us to understand that.
Unlike in the case with Ohgi and Villetta, where he does have to say it, and even then, it doesn't feel earned or sound natural. Instead, it's just rushed and confusing.
Proving again, it's not always how much time characters have on screen, but what you do with them.
So after going through those romances, it becomes clear why Ohgi and Villetta is worse than all of them. The characters don't spend enough time together, so they don't really get to know each other. It seems like Ohgi is in love with someone that doesn't exist, and Viletta's acting irrationally. It seems like both of them only love each other due to superficial reasons, at least based on what the characters actually say to each other. And without any setup in this relationship, the payoffs don't land at all. Despite the writer's attempt to make Ohgi appear as a saint, his actions are anything but. Choosing to take advantage of someone with memory loss is messed up. Even after enough time passes, Ohgi still can't acknowledge the moral ramifications of his delusions, choosing to instead to pursue it even further. This, my friends, should not be celebrated, and none of the other canonical romances have these problems, so that's why this is the worst one.
But I did say it is the most important romance, so let me explain why. This isn't specifically about Ohgi and Villetta, but more of who they represent. Villetta is a pure-blooded Britannian woman, and Ohgi is a Japanese man, now the Prime Minister of Japan. So a union of these two would never happen in a pre-Zero Requiem world. Well, that was before Rosa happened. Anyways, having this marriage occur now with the support of both sides demonstrates that the world is letting go of the past grudges. Again, that was until something else happened. Rosa! The fact that the Japanese people supported this marriage, meaning no riots or other means to disrupt it, says a lot about the union between the two sides. Lelouch wanted people to come together to exchange in an open dialogue, and what better way to start that than with a marriage involving two of the countries that started the conflict to begin with. It's a beautiful way to end the series, and I can understand why they made this couple as the catalyst for it. Sometimes I wish it was Yuffie and Suzaku instead, but well, that will never happen. Despite spending over 30 minutes ranting on why I hate this couple, conceptually I like the idea behind it. Two people from different worlds coincidentally ending up together, learn to look past their differences, and fall in love. Both characters even discover something new about themselves along the way. But the execution was terrible and delved into uncomfortable territory.
Regardless of what the writer's intentions were, the implications of how they wrote this romance are terrible. It's messed up on so many levels, as I already described in grave detail. Considering how they did a great job with Suzaku and Yuffie and the other canonical romances, I just don't understand how they screwed this up so badly.
There were so many ways to write this romance, and they chose the worst option. And so when I rewatch the later parts of R2 or Resurrection and anything beyond that, I have to pretend that the other crap didn't happen to enjoy this couple, and that should not have been the case.
So I'm pretty confident that unless we get another romance like this one, Ohgi and Villetta will continue to be the worst relationship in Code Geass.
ラズベリーは俺なんだ。ほら、あの時は正体を隠してたから。
いつからだ？
最初から？
Well, shit.